Well, injustice seems to be the doing or something happening that is not seen to be appropriate. It's not reasonable. So, I'm thinking of, to be specific, my wife divorces me, and I can't see why it's justified or why she's done it. It's as if her behaviour is not consistent with what one would have expected from the relationship. And of course, what we're also saying is that the result of that behaviour is a great cost to someone in the system. In this case, of course, I mean myself. And the problem of injustice is that you then have to live with that cost, not understanding in what way it's justified. And clearly it's a cost that's not to your apparent advantage. Now, of course, if you trust God sufficiently, then you will take it that it is to your advantage, and therefore the injustice will have very little discouragement effect on you. Because, of course, you're always encouraged by the strength of the relationship that you have with God, and in particular, His loving care. So, in a sense, I'm very clear on the solution to injustice, and which obviously, of course, is not simply getting revenge or forcing some reversal in some way. But I suppose it does mean that to the secular world, injustice is an incredible problem. And of course, our legal system attempts to redress this in as far as it can, which is of course limited. It's limited because it's hard to have a clear understanding of what the facts are and what the injustice is and what is the best way to put it right. And of course, the state will use its power in as far as it sees some sort of solution to such. And that in itself may actually reinforce the injustice. Though in some sense that's not intentionally, of course, because the state is not a person, although it has the effect of being a third party entering into the situation. So the courts may make a ruling that at least one of the parties feels is in itself an injustice and is now making the injustice somehow worse, not better. And of course that can happen. In fact, I suppose the intervention of police action is very often seen as that from one or two of the parties involved. But on the other hand, in a sense, it's the best that the state can do. To do nothing would leave a situation of anarchy in which society starts to fall apart, doesn't it? Well, I'm wondering if I can think of a secular answer to injustice. The secular solution is really, perhaps the state can be organised in such a way as to be more able to redress injustice. And, that is a strong desire. Well, the Christian religious solution is, of course, the way out. I mean, not to make the situation worse by retaliating. The world thinks that some retaliation is a good idea and that it puts other people off committing the same sort of injustice if they know retaliation's coming. It uses force in that way, doesn't it? And perhaps many of the world's relationships are held together by that sort of fear. We modify our behaviour because there will be costs if we impose on others our will, contrary to what they see as reasonable. Well, I'm not sure as I can think of a secular solution. And I suppose I am preoccupied with the fact that the godly solution is we trust in God, and that takes away the enormous amount of the pressure of injustice upon the aggrieved party. In fact, can wipe it completely clean and leaves you, of course, so much freer to do what is right rather than be strongly motivated for some sort of revenge. Revenge has its place in the secular world in that it keeps an order that might not otherwise be there by the threat of revenge. Nobody's going to want to enter into some vendetta situation, for instance. That's going to be ongoing disastrous. And to hit back is something of that. But doing such and the threat of such to some extent can result in the secular structure that we see. It's the Machiavelli approach, isn't it, that you can rule by love, but people that are not terribly loving are ruled much more effectively by fear and force. And that's the dilemma that the world is in without God. And it's major, isn't it? It reminds me there's a particular aspect of whether God exists or not, that the people that believe in such are going to be living a far more peaceful and less stressful life. Except, you might argue, in as far as they're going to be walked on by the unloving, the ungodly. Except they find other ways of avoiding the abuse than the threat of retaliation. So there's an area here of murkiness, if you like, where we're not quite clear in what way the godly are to deal with the malevolent, that for whatever reason are seeking to do harm. I mean, there's the obvious, which is to simply make as much distance between yourself and such potentially harmful people as possible. Unless there's extremely good reason, you don't hang around to be cut to pieces. You may even have some notion of using the minimum of reaction and force that might include the protection of the state and so on. As indeed I suppose I did when it came to my last wife. I thought in the end she could easily kill me in the middle of the night. Who knows what these moods might further develop into, and so you just have to call a halt to it if the option is there, which is of course you ask for police help. And I suppose if things have got worse and worse, I would have had to initiate separation. And in a way I did, because when the police put on a protection order against my wife, I applied to the courts for it to be temporarily sustained, kept, until things did settle down. And well, they settled down because she chose not to come back. And well, that was a very unhappy situation, but well, of course, was for the best if the violence had got worse and worse, which is certainly what I was anticipating could be the case. Well, marital trauma is dramatic, and it's so bad and unpleasant we don't like to dwell on it, do we? And whatsoever is good and lovely, we tempt to gravitate to and think on such things. And what is good and lovely here is that there is a solution that in large measure can be seen to be the best way to go, and that is a trust in God that He is ruling despite what you might be praying for instance, when He doesn't respond by simply putting things right, in your estimation and evaluation of such. And in the longer run, of course, you can very often see how God's taken you through a path that was very necessary and actually a great blessing. But yeah, you did find it tough at the time, and of course you'd have found it far less tough the more you are able to trust God for the situation. So the solution is pretty straightforward, really. You're up against something that is extremely unjust, as you understand it, or extremely bad, might I say, and you exercise great faith in that God is doing it for a blessing, and that you should do what is reasonable to do in the circumstances to avoid the situation being obviously worse, at least in the short run. So, if you think there's danger to life and limb, you get yourself out of there if you can, and you're still trusting God that perhaps in some way He's going to put it right, put the relationship back together, but you're also trusting that if He's not going to, that will be what is truly right. It's quite simple, really, isn't it? I don't mean that you'll have an easy time of it, because it will depend on how much experience you've already got. If you like, how much investment there is in this relationship with God, which you can call upon at such a time. And some people, of course, have very little relationship in such, and are therefore more exposed to problems of the like. A great turning to God will do it, but be better to be equipped with a loving relationship with God already, of course. Am I making a relationship with God a question then of self-interest? Yes, of course I am. Relationship with wonderful people is incredible self-interest, and if it's truly wonderful, it'll be a blessing, purpose to be a blessing to for all life, everything that God cares for. And I hold the view, don't I, that if He made it, He values it and cares for it. So we are concerned for the welfare of all, and that's a sort of universal principle that we're not fully equipped to handle, but we're moving towards it, where we purpose to be a blessing wherever we go, certainly to all life, and probably to all. Thank you, Heavenly Father. Well, I don't know if it's helpful to add, but I mean, the outcome has been for me to have more time to be spiritual. And, well, I may have been in not so much a dead end before my wife deteriorated. But well, I certainly didn't do all this recording, for instance, which has been major for me. And, of course, I'm now free to pursue spiritual life without having to constantly make sure it's compatible with my marriage. And no doubt that is the argument for celibacy and, you know, priests, for instance, not getting married, and monks and so forth. But whatever. Yes. So materially, well, yes, it's taken a terrible hit. I no longer own my own house, although I'm driving a lovely car because I've spent some of the equity on it, and I've given away a lot of money. I mean, relative to my means, of course. I've given away most of the equity because partly in generosity, but also partly in that it was not a great benefit to me. I couldn't buy a house with it because I'm not eligible for a mortgage sufficient to buy in the market now. And, you know, or in the last 5 years, really. And so I've been blessed by it. And I'd have been blessed much more if my faith and trust had been even greater. I say even because it was great for me, in the sense that I did practice being thankful. You could say not successful enough in that at times I still felt wretched. But they were passing times, and passing because of, as I understand it, my spiritual solution, which is to mechanically thank God for the situation every time it preoccupies the mind, and one has the courage to do it, of course. And so that was some success. No doubt I could have been a greater success in some way, but we've come through. And God has me in a position now which is, in some sense, better than before. In a spiritual sense, probably. Although I didn't feel spiritually I was wrong before. But certainly much has happened. And, we're back to it's very hard for a ruler to measure itself, isn't it? It's not able to do it. You're not going to know whether the rule is accurate or inaccurate if it simply has only itself to measure by. To some extent, we got our past self to measure by, but that quickly gets rewritten, by our view of history. And we don't judge others, we don't judge ourselves. Is it definitely a benefit? Well, I can still trust it to God that it is, and it's not difficult to trust it to God that it is most of the time now. Whereas, of course, when the initial event happened, which was dragged out over a long period of time, it was hard. And it would have been less hard if I'd have been stronger in trust and faith to begin with. Which hopefully I am now, and therefore better equipped to suggest to others, I was going to say advise others on the best way of handling injustice and trauma and difficulties. But yeah, whatever. Thank you, Heavenly Father.